Picture the end of a big meal, with empty plates and everyone leaning back in their chairs. Hunger seems to have disappeared almost completely. Then someone mentions dessert, and something strange happens. A cake appears, or a bowl of ice cream, and attention suddenly wakes up again. The stomach may be closed for dinner, but dessert appears to know a side entrance. That feeling is not proof that willpower failed or that the body is broken. It points to a deeper question about why sweetness can stay appealing after ordinary hunger fades. This video is not trying to explain every mechanism behind wanting dessert after dinner. Instead, that familiar moment opens a much older question. Did people long before cake, ice cream, and delivery apps feel a similar pull toward sweetness? Is there one moment when humans first started craving sugar? The question sounds as if it should have a date buried somewhere in deep history. But the word craving hides several different questions inside it. One is about sensing sweetness. Another is about seeking it on purpose. A third is about how often the world makes that reward available. Those are related, but they are not the same thing. So this story will separate them before bringing them back together. We will move from fossil teeth and ripe fruit to wild honey, sugarcane, trade, and mass production. The goal is not to invent one dramatic origin moment. It is to understand how an ancient attraction met a world that gradually stopped making it wait. Before tracing that history, we need one clear definition. Here, sugar sometimes stands for something broader than refined white crystals. It refers to the attraction towards sweet, energy-dense foods. Whole fruit, honey, cane juice, crystallized sugar, and refined sugar still differ greatly in concentration, context, and availability. This video is not treating them as identical. It is tracking how an old attraction met increasingly concentrated, storable, and accessible forms of sweetness. The first question is detection. Can an animal sense sweetness and treat that signal as meaningful? That is a sensory ability, not proof of an uncontrollable craving. A signal can be useful long before anyone has a word for the feeling it produces. The second question is pursuit. Will an animal act on that signal by choosing, remembering, or seeking a sweet food source? Picking ripe fruit over unripe fruit is pursuit. Returning to a tree that produced well before is pursuit. Following bees toward a hidden hive is pursuit. The third question is repeated opportunity. How often can the same attraction be triggered, rewarded, and triggered again? Images, smells, habits, convenience, and instant purchase all matter here. A reward that appears once a season creates a different behavioral world from one available every hour. Repeated opportunity does not automatically mean compulsion or addiction. It simply means the door can open far more often. One caution matters before we travel any further back. Fossil teeth can suggest what ancient creatures ate. They cannot tell us exactly what those creatures felt or wanted. Detection is biological. Pursuit is behavioral. Repeated opportunity depends heavily on the surrounding environment. The oldest part of the story begins before humans existed to name any of these experiences. Rewind past cities, agriculture, and written history into forests where early primates lived. There were no food labels, stocked pantries, or guaranteed meals waiting for next week. Every day involved choices about which foods were worth time and effort. Should a fig be eaten while slightly green, or left to ripen and risk being stolen? Is a hard seed pod worth cracking for the small reward hidden inside? Which part of the forest offers energy without wasting too much movement? These were not abstract nutrition decisions. A poor choice could cost time while providing little usable reward. A useful choice could make the next climb, escape, or search slightly easier. In that world, sweetness could work as a clue. It was not a guarantee of safety or a promise that a food was perfect. It was one useful signal among many. Color, smell, texture, and memory mattered too. Sweetness did not replace those signals, but it could join them in pointing toward a worthwhile food. Researchers studying ancient primate teeth from the Fayum Depression in Egypt have examined their wear and damage. Some teeth show chipping that may point toward tougher or harder foods. Others show cavity-like damage that may indicate softer, more fermentable, sugar-rich foods. Those patterns can suggest diet, but they do not reveal emotion. A cavity cannot tell us whether an ancient primate desired a food or simply ate what was available. The safer conclusion is not that early primates had a modern sweet tooth exactly like ours. It is that sensitivity to useful food signals mattered in the environments where primates evolved. An animal that noticed ripe, soft, energy-rich fruit could gain a small advantage meal after meal. Across enormous spans of time, repeated small advantages could shape which sensitivities persisted. No animal needed to understand calories for this process to matter. The advantage worked through ordinary choices repeated across generations. Picture a branch holding a few ripe figs behind a screen of green leaves. Nearby sits a hard pod that offers less reward for more effort. A primate choosing between them was not selecting dessert. It was reading a very old kind of information. Sweetness began not as a dessert category, but as a signal wrapped in flavor. Once that signal mattered, another question followed. How difficult was it to turn the signal into an actual reward? The first barrier was timing. Ripe fruit appears for a limited window and then disappears again. Different trees ripen at different moments, even within the same season. Fruit left too long can rot, fall, or get taken by another animal. There was no guarantee that a ripe piece of fruit would exist on any random afternoon. Even a remembered source could fail because the timing was wrong. The second barrier was distance. Sweet sources were scattered across territory, rather than waiting in one convenient place. Some grew high in branches, while others sat deep inside thickets. Traveling toward a remembered tree required time, energy, and risk. By the time an animal arrived, the remembered fruit might already be gone. The journey itself could consume part of the energy the food was supposed to provide. The third barrier was competition. Birds, insects, primates, and other animals wanted the same short-lived reward. A tree heavy with ripe fruit rarely stayed that way for long. A valuable patch could attract many mouths at exactly the same moment. Returning to such a tree shows memory and motivation. It does not show that the reward could be repeated whenever the animal wanted it. The attraction could still have been strong, even when the opportunity was rare. Scarcity limits behavior without proving that the underlying preference is weak. What the environment withheld was reliability. Picture one branch bending under ripe fruit for a few short days. Weeks later, the same branch is bare and ordinary again. Season, distance, and competition kept sweetness unpredictable and hard-won. Some of the richest natural sources added another barrier entirely. They could be dangerous. Now move forward to early humans who could plan, climb, cooperate, and eventually control fire. Wild honey offered one of nature's most concentrated sweet reward. Unlike ripe fruit, a hive did not advertise itself clearly from a distance. Finding one required attention to subtle clues. A person might notice a line of bees, a hollow trunk, or a hum near a cliff face. Locating the hive only began the work. The reward was hidden inside a defended structure rather than hanging openly from a branch. Someone still had to climb a tree, scale rock, or reach into an awkward hollow. Smoke might be used to calm the bees before disturbing the hive. That required knowledge, preparation, and some control over fire. Stings were a predictable cost rather than a surprising accident. Timing mattered as well, because a hive taken too early or too late offered less reward. Ancient rock art at Cueva de la Araña in Spain shows figures climbing toward hives. The image illustrates honey-gathering behavior, not the first moment humans ever wanted sweetness. Its exact dating and interpretation belong to specialists. What matters here is the pattern it represents. A concentrated reward sat on one side, and real danger sat on the other. Honey required time, skill, climbing, risk, and the possibility of returning empty-handed. It was concentrated sweetness, but it came packaged with a serious access problem. Prehistoric people may still have valued it intensely, but intense attraction did not create instant access. There was no cupboard to open and no jar to buy within seconds. The reward could not be repeated 3 times before lunch. The world still forced sweetness to wait. A rare reward could be memorable precisely because it was difficult to repeat. Over time, cultivation and processing gradually removed the barriers that nature had imposed. The next shift was not a new desire suddenly appearing. It was technology making an old reward easier to obtain, store, and move. At each stage, one practical obstacle became smaller. The important change was not sweetness itself, but the relationship between sweetness and effort. Cultivating sugarcane reduced dependence on finding a useful plant by chance, but cane still tied sweetness to a field, a growing season, and a particular location. The plant had to be grown, cut, and processed before its sweetness could travel. Extracting the juice reduced another barrier. Pressing or crushing cane separated the sweet liquid from the plant's fibrous bulk. That meant less material had to be carried, chewed, or stored for the same reward. The sweet part was beginning to separate from the physical burden of the stalk. Concentration reduced the burden further. Boiling the liquid packed more sweetness into a smaller amount of syrup. Less weight and space could now carry more of the desired taste. Concentration also made sweetness easier to use in other foods and preparations. Crystallization changed the problem again. Solid crystals resisted spoilage far better than fresh fruit or cane juice. Sugar could be divided, measured, stored, and transported without the original plant coming along. A perishable seasonal experience was becoming a durable commodity. It could travel in a merchant's bag far from the field where the cane had grown. This sequence is best understood as a chain of functional changes, not one neat universal timeline. Across different places and periods, each technique removed another barrier. Cultivation reduced chance. Extraction reduced bulk. Concentration reduced weight and volume. Crystallization reduced spoilage. Important details remain uncertain. Exactly when sugarcane was first domesticated, likely somewhere in New Guinea, is still researched and debated. The precise timeline of early pressing, boiling, and crystallization, especially in South Asia, is not fully settled either. So this story should not pretend that one exact date solves everything. The larger pattern matters more than a falsely precise answer. The history is valuable because it shows what each technical change made possible. Sweetness was gradually pried loose from the plant, the season, the place, and the clock of spoilage. Humans did not create the attraction. They created ways for the reward to travel without the fruit, hive, or field. Yet one major barrier remained. For a long time, crystallized sugar was still expensive. Crystallized sugar often functioned more like a spice, medicine, gift, or status symbol than an everyday food. Most people encountered it rarely, if they encountered it at all. For much of history, wanting sugar and being able to buy it were very different things. That changed as production and long-distance trade expanded. Supply increased, and prices fell for the people buying the finished product. Regular purchase became possible for far more households. A reward that had once announced wealth could begin slipping into ordinary routine. Sugar began appearing more often in drinks, baked goods, and ordinary meals. Mass production pushed availability further. Sweetness became less dependent on one place or one harvest window. It reached more regions, more social classes, and more daily routines. It could appear in the morning, during work, after a meal, and inside foods that did not look like rare luxuries. A rare treasure began to resemble a subscription service. The change was not merely that more sugar existed somewhere in the economy. It was that ordinary people could encounter it more often, in more places, with less planning. This was not the first time humans wanted sweetness. It was when repeated access began reaching ordinary people on a much larger scale. The wait between wanting and having became shorter. The effort required from the eater dropped sharply. The danger of climbing toward a hive disappeared from most encounters. The chance to repeat the reward kept rising. A desire once constrained by season and danger could now be answered by habit and purchase. But cheaper sugar did not mean its total cost vanished. Plantation systems, forced labor, and slavery carried much of that cost instead. The burden moved away from the person eating the finished product. Consumers saw a lower price without seeing every human cost behind it. It did not disappear from the world. For the eater, sweetness became cheaper. For someone else, it remained brutally expensive. That history belongs inside the argument, not beside it. The barriers facing consumers were reduced partly by shifting enormous burdens onto distant workers. The spoon looked simple because much of its cost had been moved out of sight. That hidden transfer is part of how an expensive rarity became an ordinary pleasure. By the time sugar became ordinary, several old barriers had changed together. Waiting became shorter. Distance mattered less. Spoilage mattered less. Physical danger mattered less. Price became manageable for far more people. Nothing about the ancient attraction had to become entirely new for these changes to matter. The world had simply become much better at answering it. An ancient preference was now surrounded by systems designed to grow, preserve, transport, sell, and repeatedly present its reward. That still does not mean biology controls every choice at the table. Preference, craving, compulsion, and addiction are not interchangeable words. People also differ in habits, experiences, culture, and response to cues. One person may notice a dessert and move on. Another may connect the same dessert with celebration, comfort, or routine. Evolution helps explain why sweetness can grab attention. Environment helps explain how often that attention is invited, rewarded, and repeated. Now return to the meal from the beginning. Dinner is over. and ordinary hunger has faded. Dessert can still look appealing because hunger is not the only system shaping attention toward food. The reward attached to a sweet taste does not automatically disappear when the stomach feels full. Fullness can reduce the need for more food without making every possible reward equally uninteresting. That does not mean the body is broken. It also does not reduce every decision to willpower. The familiar dessert moment is one modern expression of an older attraction meeting immediate opportunity. The cake is visible. The smell is close. The social cue has already arrived. The effort required is almost zero. No climbing, searching, or waiting for a season stands in the way. The reward can appear seconds after the idea enters the room. None of those conditions existed in the forest, at the seasonal tree, or beneath the wild hive. That is why the useful question is not only how strong the desire feels, it is also how many barriers stand between the signal and the reward. Distance, visibility, convenience, and repetition can shape behavior more than people expect. That observation is not a diagnosis and not a claim that choice disappears. It is a reminder that choice always happens inside a setting. Evolution helps explain why the signal has power. The environment helps determine how often that signal is triggered and rewarded. So when did humans first start craving sugar? The honest answer depends on which meaning of craving we choose. There was no single day when everything began. If craving means noticing and valuing sweetness, that ability predates Homo sapiens. If it means actively seeking sweet foods, that behavior may stretch deep into prehistory. Ripe fruit, wild honey, and other rare rewards likely attracted ancient humans for a very long time. If it means being triggered, satisfied, and triggered again several times in one day, that is a different question. Those conditions emerged only after a long chain of cultivation, extraction, concentration, crystallization, trade, and mass production. None of those steps alone marks the birth of craving. Together, they allowed an ancient attraction to become an everyday condition. The change was gradual, uneven, and deeply historical, rather than one sudden biological event. Humans did not suddenly become weaker. The surrounding world became less willing to make sweetness wait. The reward moved closer across generations. The barriers became smaller and harder to notice. A signal once separated from its reward by days, miles, risk, or money could now be answered almost immediately. Picture sweetness as something that once sat behind a series of doors. One door was the season, opening briefly before closing again. Another was distance. Another was danger. Another was spoilage. Another was price. Humans did not open every door at once. Different societies opened them at different times and in different ways. They opened them gradually across an enormous stretch of history. Even then, the cost behind those doors did not vanish. Some of it was transferred to people far from the table and hidden from the person holding the spoon. The desire may be ancient. The frequency of its modern rewards is historical. What changed was how rarely the world now tells it no. Humans did not invent the attraction to sweetness. We built a world in which that attraction almost never has to wait.